I get my good angle, right? No, I have a tendency to, if I don't square up right away, to wander off. And then whoever's watching online, they're like, where'd the pastor go? We hear a voice, but nothing's happening. So I always have to check in with my tech team. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, some of you are awake. Some of you are like, cool. I don't have much announcements. I do have a celebration. So last Sunday, I told you what happened with the children's ministry. Anybody remember what we were celebrating last Sunday? Baptism. We had a bunch of kids get baptized. That was awesome to see. Well, some of the adults said, well, if they're doing it, we want to do it too. So at 2 p.m. Today, I will be down at Whispering Pines with some of our crew. And we have at least 2 adults who have said we want to identify with Jesus as Lord through the act of baptism. So I want to keep that in front of you because when someone gets baptized, it's a pretty big deal. And so we need to celebrate that. So that's what we'll be doing today. And that being said, often we'll put together a church-wide baptism if we know a bunch of people are stacking up. But as we said many times in Acts, when Philip was talking to the Ethiopian eunuch, after the Ethiopian eunuch came to the realization of who Jesus was, and he believed in him as Savior, then he said, well, I got to be baptized. And he said, look, there's water. What stops us? So that's what we believe. So if at any point you ever want to be baptized, just let us know. We'll make it happen. You don't have to wait. We have baptized people in the middle of October and in the middle of the night in High Rock Lake. And let me just say, we had to start a bonfire before because when it's like 40 degrees outside, that's a really waking up kind of baptism. Like, it shocks this devil right out of you, right? Like, whoa, I'm awake, I'm alive, I believe in Jesus, yeehaw. And then we all go dry off by the bonfire, but we'll do it. I mean, it could be, even if we have to break ice off the surface of the water, we're going to do it, okay? So whatever it takes, if you feel like that's something you want to do, just let us know. Anytime, any place, we'll get it done. So let's go ahead and dive into today's topic. So we are still continuing down Hebrews chapter 11. That means we are still studying the object of faith. Okay, so some of you are paying attention. Thanks, Stephanie. I appreciate it. Me and you. We'll hang in there together, right? But before we get there, I want to talk about something that I love to do. In fact, I'm wearing a shirt that talks about it, and it's not Mountain Dew, which is one of my loves. If Mountain Dew, PepsiCo, if you are watching, which cool deal if you're watching and you want to sponsor us. I don't know how church sponsorships works, but we love Pepsi and we definitely love Mountain Dew, so we'll get behind that. But I love to fish. From deep sea fishing to inshore, from the pier to the surf, to the pond, to the lake, even mountain streams, anything and everything in between. In fact, I loved it so much when I was a kid. Well, before I get there, where's my fisherman at? And fisherwomen, it's okay. Mr. Beck, I understand that one. Yeah, we have a famous fisherman here, but we won't draw attention to him. He's right there. He's really cool. No. All right, let me put it this way. So maybe you don't relate too much because there's a few hands raised. My brother and I would find every excuse we could to fish. They included a little creek behind our house. We go to the city park, and city park has a little stream running through it. There's little fish. We would fish that. Like, instead of being on the playground, we were fishing. Like, one time my brother had this rubber snake toy, and he chopped off a piece of it because it almost looked like a rubber worm, and he hooked a hook on it, and caught a bass at the city park. I'm like, come on, dude, let's go. So, I love fishing. In fact, one of the reasons I love fishing more so than a lot of the other outdoor activities I participate in is because there really isn't a season for fishing. Anybody here looking forward to September? Okay, come. For the outdoors. Where's Daniel? Mike, what comes in September? Yeah. Bow season is right around the corner, folks. Okay, well, I know you guys will be doing something else, but I'll be in the woods. Look, I love hunting. And so when September rolls around, you start to gear up. But the thing is, once New Year's over, you're like, well, I got a few weeks of turkey, and that's about it. And so you have to find something else to do for the rest of the year, but not with fishing. Not with fishing. If you can get to water, you can go fishing. Now, I understand there are times of the year when it's more productive. That's fine. But if you can get there, you can at least give it a shot. Now, growing up, I didn't have a lot of opportunity to do stuff like deep sea fishing, which I do a lot of now. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to do salt fishing unless we were on vacation. That's what we did when we went to the beach, pier, and surf fish. And we didn't get to do much lake fishing. We didn't have much access to boats. So I grew up fishing good old-fashioned farm ponds. And my dad, he was primarily a bass fisherman, which meant we were primarily bass fishermen. I mean, when you're younger, you get them introduced by little bobber and hook and brim and all that. But as we aged, he got us set into bass. Now, I know May and June full moons, we would put our bass gear aside because that's the best time for brim when they were on bed. But aside from that, we were going for bass. So I have a fondness in my heart for bass fishing, a little bit of nostalgia. So I had a few of you raise your hands. You said, oh, I like to fish. Who here's a bass fisherman? Mr. Beck, you can raise your hand now. We know. All right. My bass fisherman, what is the best time of day for bass fishing? Morning. And we call it something different all day. Mr. Beck understands what's going on. But we call it something different. We don't call it morning. We call it what? Nobody? Cool. I get to tell you something. Topwater. Topwater. You see, in those early morning hours, bass go nuts for baits on the top of the water. And so most people, we use things like buzz baits or poppers. Getting there. Hang tight. I promise we're getting there. And when you're using one of those, the best thing about topwater is you see the bite because it blows up. Bass are ambush predators, and so they come up from underneath, and the water busts, and you know, there's a fish. Set the hook. Man, when you see that boil come, it's time to rip lips. That is a phrase. Instant hook set, ready for action. You're in the game. Now, if you switch to a fan favorite topwater, Jared, the one you talked about, this, if you switch to this little fella, but you react like you would with a buzzbait or a popper, you're going to be sorely disappointed. You see, you can't do quick reaction with a frog. If you do, you'll lose most of the fish you're trying to catch. You got to have patience with a frog bait. You see, if you rush into the situation, you want to get into that hook set, you want that action, and it starts to happen, and you go and set the hook, that frog pops right out of the water and lands at your feet. You're like, there was a fish on there 2 seconds ago. What happened? You see, when bass eat frogs, they hit it, and then you got to give them a second to actually get it in their mouths. And so if you are impatient, you pull it right out of their mouths. So you have to give it a beat or two. But the thing is, here you are at the edge of the pond. You're already on edge because you're ready to fish. You're looking forward to action. The sun is just starting to light the horizon. It's not even over the trees yet. The birds are just starting to wake up. The fog is on the top of the pond surface. And you're throwing this frog lure around structure and down the bank. And you're fishing it on. And then it happens. But you got to be patient. You can't rush in. Even though you want instant satisfaction, you can't rush in. You got to give it a second. And then set the hook. And if you do that, that delayed action brings a better outcome. And why do I talk about frog fishing today? Well, we're not fishing for frogs, FYI. Fishing with frogs, topwater lures. Why do I talk about that? I hope I don't forget this in my pocket and sit down for a discussion group. There's 2 big hooks in there. Might be uncomfortable. So if you hear me holler out, it's not the spirit, it's the hooks. Anyway, we'll go on from there. The reason we talk about this delayed action, this topwater fishing we're talking about, is it's similar to how faith works in our lives. Because it's through faith we make hard decisions. Now, last week we spoke about how we have to have faith to take a stand against the current tide of culture. Today we're going to continue that course of thought, but now we're going to look at what happens when we use faith and allow it to give us the willpower to not only stand against the tide of culture, but to make a choice that has a potential unfavorable outcome for us. You'll see what we're talking about as it unfolds. So let's go ahead and dive into Hebrews 11 today. If you're following along with us in your Bible device, we're in Hebrews 11, and we're going to be in verse 24. We're reading verse 24 through verses 27. So let's go ahead and read that together. It says this: "It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. But where I want us to dial in, where I want us to focus on, especially right here at the start, where the rubber meets the road, is this phrase. Put it back up there, if you will, Leslie. He chose to share the opposition of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. And this is where we're going to start today. Now, as always, let's look at the full account from the Old Testament to bring us up to speed about what the writer of Hebrews is talking about. Now, most of us know the story of Moses, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, let me bring you up to date. Last week when we left off, Moses was a baby, and his parents decided, hey, this evil king wants to kill innocent children because he's afraid of us. And so they said, we will not succumb to evil. And they took a stand, and they kept their son alive, and they hid him. But the thing is, the scriptures tell us they got to a point where it was hard to keep him quiet and hidden. Any parents out here? Where's my parents? All right, remember the newborn face? And they're really cute, and they cry a little bit, but they're really cute when they first come home. But quickly, they become these little bundles of crying, really loud crying, just dirty diapers, needing something 24/7. It exhausts you, right? Well, that's where we find Moses' parents. They're a couple of months in, and no longer can baby Moses just be like hidden away so that the guards don't hear or notice. And so now they have to do something about it. And so they decide to put their faith in God to keep this beautiful child alive. And so what they do is they take a wicker basket and they cover it in pitch so that it's water sealed. They put him in it and they let him float down the Nile River. And his sister, Miriam, she's old enough to be cognizant. She sees what's happening. She's like, I'm going to follow this basket because I want to see what happens to my baby brother. And lo and behold, God guides that basket. And here is a group of Egyptians. And you would think, oh no, right into the hands of the enemy. God, what are you doing? Well, it's Pharaoh's daughter. And she's there with her bathing party at the Nile. And they notice this floating basket. And floating baskets are not typically something you see in a river. Well, you know, occasionally if it's washed away, but we're always curious, what's in the basket? So she gets it fetched out of the river, and they open it up, and she sees this baby. And it's the one that her dad says, we got to kill all these male Hebrew children. But she sees it, and her heart goes out to it. And she's like, I am going to rescue this child. And so she picks him right up and decides that she's going to raise him as her own child. Now, his sister Miriam, or Moses' sister Miriam, has been following this whole thing happen. She's watching it take place. So she does something very brave and very crafty. She pops up and she's like, oh, ma'am, see, you found a baby. That's crazy, right? I don't know why I'm following a baby basket. It's funny seeing you here, right? But he needs feeding, and do you want a nurse to help with that? Wet nurse specifically, and the Pharaoh's daughter was like, well, that's a great idea. I would love to have a nursemaid to help me raise this child. And Miriam's like, well, I know a lady, so let me go fetch her and we'll make this work out. And so Moses' mother has let him go into the arms of God, trusting in his fate, and God has brought him right back to her, but now he is under the full protection of Pharaoh's household. And she gets to continue to raise her baby boy. And so it says she keeps him until he was weaned. And then at that time, he was given back to Pharaoh's daughter, and now he is raised in Pharaoh's house. And what this means for him is he is now, instead of being a slave under the opposition of Egypt, he is now placed at the top of the pyramid, no pun there. And he's afforded the best education. He's afforded the best wealth, stability. Like anything that you would want for your own child, Moses gets. You see, at this time, Egypt was at the cutting edge. They were a highly advanced people, very smart, very intelligent, and very wealthy. And so basically, this takes this little slave child, Moses, and it elevates him to the adopted grandson of the man on top of the world. He is the grandson of Pharaoh. This would be on par of something like if one of us today found out the Rothschild family was adopting us. And we came into all of that comes with that family name. And so from now on, Moses has it set. He is literally a prince of Egypt. In fact, scholars look at it. At this time, this Pharaoh, it's noted, could not produce a son. So most likely, Moses would have been in line to become the next Pharaoh. He's set up. And so now we pick up in Exodus chapter 2 with Moses as an adult. But where we find him, where the scriptures start, in Exodus 2, starting in verse 11, it's going to start giving us an insight into what Moses was doing and help us understand what the writer of Hebrews was trying to bring our focus to. So let's look at it together. Exodus chapter 2, starting in verse 11. It says this, many years later when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people. So you know that at some point he knows his history. He knows he is of the Hebrew people, the Hebrews. And he saw how hard they were forced to work. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure that no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. The next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw two Hebrew men fighting. "Why are you beating up your friend?" Moses said to the one who had started the fight. The man replied, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" Then Moses was afraid, thinking, "Everyone knows what I did." And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened, and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. All right, first of all, before we get too far, let's go ahead and set some ground rules. Word of advice. This is not the Bible giving you an excuse for wanton violence. Like, if you have a disagreement, this doesn't tell you, go cap a fool, right? That's not the way to handle it. There are better ways to do this. Was there better ways for Moses to do this? Probably. Actually, yes. But it's not that Moses' mistake I want you to see. Instead, I want you to see past that into what he was actually doing. He was protecting the innocent. He did it the wrong way, but he was protecting the innocent. But notice that he says he looked in all directions first. What we see from this is that Moses understood that his next actions were going to have potential permanent effects on his future. This was a no going back decision. Like at this point, everything changes from here on out. But in this moment, he chooses here not to identify with those who have it all. Instead, he chooses to take his stand with those who are oppressed, with those who are suffering, his own people. Now, here's the truth. If it was you and I don't know about how you would have reacted, but it would have been really tempting just to turn a blind eye. Like, man, that's a hard thing going on, bro, but you are a slave and he is a slave master and I can't do much about it. I'm sorry. And just walk away. Because by doing that, you don't rock the boat. You get to stay in the lap of luxury. You get to keep your status as one of Pharaoh's household. He could have continued to live in luxury. But look again at how Hebrews put it. Let's look again at Hebrews 11, starting verse 25. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. What we see here from Moses' actions, both in Exodus and in Hebrews, is Moses didn't make his choice on happenstance. Moses knew about the oppression of the Hebrew people, and he knew that was not okay. He knew someone needed to step in and start doing something. In fact, when Stephen was addressing the council in Acts chapter 7, he brings back up Moses. And from there we understand Moses understood he was to be a leader for these people. Even all the way back here, he just didn't know how or why or what was going to happen. And so he took action with that knowledge. But he knew the oppression of the Hebrew people was something that he had to do something about it. And so this ties us back to a little bit of what we talked last week. When you're in the face of evil, you have to take a side. Now, often when in this topic, you'll hear the quote, "The only thing necessary For the triumph of evil is for good men to do what? Nothing. Now, when you study this, modern history has proved that usually this is attributed to Edmund Burke, but that's a false claim. He actually didn't say that. So we're not sure where that came from. But it's very similar to another quote from a guy named John Stuart Mill. Let me read to you what he said. He said this: "Let not anyone pacify his conscience by the delusion that he can do no harm if he takes no part and forms no opinion. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. He is not a good man who, without a protest, allows wrong to be committed in his name, and with the means which he helps to supply, because he will not trouble himself to use his mind on the subject." Now that's an archaic way to say the original, basically, but it all boils down to the same thing. Now that's not our main theme today, but it is worth noting. But I want you to see something. Our actions say something about us. In fact, look what James says in James chapter 1, verse 27. It says, "Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you." So if you see something that needs doing as a Christ follower, step up and do it. Don't worry about what it might cost you. That's not the question to ask yourself. The question is, what needs to be done and how do I do it? Moses saw this. He saw a problem that needed to be solved. He didn't do it the right way, but he saw a problem. He stepped in and he helped. And he knew that by doing so, he was risking the chance of it costing him life as he knew it. In fact, he had the risk of actually costing him his life, but it did end his lap of luxury. Because after this, he now has to flee into the desert of Midian. And so he goes from a lofty prince of one of, if not the biggest world power at the time, to a lowly shepherd in the wilderness for the next 40 years. In fact, the next time we see him continuing this portion of Exodus, he's 80 years old. So from the age of 40 to 80, he lives his life in the wilderness as a mere shepherd. But even with that risk, he still chose obedience over pleasure. You see, God provided for him, and eventually he was made the leader of the nation of Israel, but he lost luxury because he lives the rest of his life as a nomad. And living as a nomad, even as the leader of a nomadic people, is so much different than living in the palace of Egypt. And so at this moment, he says goodbye to it all for the rest of his life. But look again at what Hebrews said in Hebrews 11:25. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying, here it is, the fleeting pleasures of sin. The fleeting pleasures of sin. And that's what I need you to see today. The fleeting pleasure of sin. Now, here's the reality. I'm about to tell you truth, and we're being recorded right now, and it's going to go out live. And so if someone clips this and shares it wrongly, out of context, it could be taken wrong. It might go viral for the wrong reason. But hear me out. I have to say this. Sin is fun. Sin is absolutely a blast. You have a good time doing it. You feel good doing it. It is a good thing. But, big but right here. It doesn't last forever. You see, if sin wasn't pleasurable, why would people chase it their entire lives? So there is some pleasure there. But like Hebrews said, it is a fleeting pleasure. It doesn't last forever. I want to remind you about something we've talked about before, but something Roger taught me. And it goes like this. Sin will take you further than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay, always. So let me make it simple. Let me spell it out for you. And I'm not calling anybody out because I have a mirror looking at me on this. We're going to just choose one sin, and I'm going to show you how it works. Gluttony. Gluttony is a sin. We don't like to talk about it. We don't think about it much. Rarely do you hear it preached about, especially in the Baptist world. I grew up Baptist. Let's shout out to potlucks, right? But gluttony as a sin is a real thing. But take a moment, if you will, and follow me along in your imaginations, and let's put ourselves. The weather's changing. It's getting a little cooler outside. Football's in full bloom. Keep your mind's eye open on this one. The leaves are falling. You walk into your family's house, wherever you gather. You can smell the aromas. Thanksgiving is spread out before you. Now, if you're American, you know there's nothing better than a good old Thanksgiving spread. You got roasted turkey over there. Man, that smells good. You smelling it? I'm smelling it. Got stuffing that only grandma can make. Like, I know your stovetop box stuffing is good and all, but man, when grandma makes it, and y'all know what I'm talking about, grandma stuffing, always the best. Mac and cheese, that's the good mac and cheese too. It's really creamy, oh yeah. And if you like cranberries, it's right there. If you're not a turkey fan, someone always brings a honey baked ham. Oh, it's right. Green bean casserole. So, man, are you tasting it now? Are you hungry? I am. So here we are, it's Thanksgiving, and you're ready to eat. Or maybe it's not Thanksgiving, maybe you're on vacation or somewhere special, and you decide, you know what, we're going to treat ourselves as a family, and we're going to go to this really, really fancy buffet, and it's going to cost us a butt ton, which is a real measurement, it's not crass, and if you are still uncomfortable, we'll call it a boatload. But butt ton is an actual measurement. You can go look it up later. I don't know why it has to do with anything. I don't think it's what we think it is, but it is. But it costs you a whole bunch. We'll call it that. A whole bunch of money to get into this fancy buffet. And so you tell yourself, look, we got to get our money's worth, right? It's all you can eat. And there's some fancy stuff. Like maybe you're at the beach and it's one of those really swanky joints with like all you can eat crab legs or something. And you tell yourself, man, it's probably a once in a lifetime event. We may never come back. So kids, eat up. We're getting our money's worth. Which means you look at your little one, you're like, you can't have one chicken tender and a half a fry and say you're full, right? We paid full price for you, and you're going to eat it if it's the last thing you do, right? We all know. We all had that kid who doesn't want to eat at the fancy buffet, even though you paid $100 for him to come in. And so you get in and you eat your money's worth, or you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you're like, man, this comes once a year. And so you eat and you eat and you eat and you eat. And then when you don't think you can anymore, something else comes up and you eat again. And you keep eating until you're like, I made a mistake. I made a big mistake, right? Look, here's the truth. If anybody ever tells you, I don't like to eat, there's a few things going on. One, they have a medical condition. If that's not the case, then maybe something happened and they lost their taste buds. We'll give them this. Maybe there's some trauma in their life around food. And if that's the case, then we'll give them a pass. But most likely, if someone comes up to you and is like, I don't really care about eating, they're lying to you because food tastes great. Let me tell you about this place called Shady Maple. I've been talking about food a lot. You're going to be ready to eat. Shady Maple is an amazing buffet in Pennsylvania. It's near the Lancaster County area. It is Pennsylvania Dutch food at its finest. Last time we went, it was prime rib night. I've only been once. And it's all and it wasn't like back end prime rib. Like, this is the good stuff. Prime rib, all you can eat, ribeye steak, stuffing, potatoes, rolls, macaroni and cheese, fried chicken. And don't even get me started on the desserts, y'all. This will make a diabetic go to heaven just seeing it. It was an amazing place. Basically, think about what you wanted Golden Corral to be, but just not disappointing. And we went there one time, and I had to make a choice. Thankfully, give God credit for it. I chose not to be gluttonous that day. It was a close call. But you ever been to a place like that where you eat yourself physically sick? And then the next day, you get a hangover, and you didn't have alcohol. It's just a food hangover. Y'all, let's be honest. Let's put our pride aside. Who knows what the food hangover feels like the next day? Come on. You know what I'm talking about. We've all been there. But here's the thing. We're dumb enough to do it the very next time a holiday rolls up. The very next time we go to another fancy restaurant, we do it again. Why? We suffer because of our choices, but yet we go back and do it again. Why? Because sin is fun. It's pleasurable for a season. But notice what Hebrews said. It is a fleeting pleasure. You see, people choose all the time to go against God's standard, and they don't wait till marriage. And in the process, they have a blast doing it. They have a blast. It's a good time. They live it up. They're like, man, these Christians don't know what they're missing. But then they quickly realize later in life that what they thought was harmless was actually harming their ability to truly connect with their spouse on an intimate level. In fact, that's not just Christianese talking. That is backed up by scientific research. The more partners you have, the less you are able to truly have an intimate connection with your spouse. Think about money. Money feels great. If I had a $100 bill for everybody here, would you come get it? Probably. We all go to a fancy buffet and be gluttonous, right? Like $100 would be great. $1,000 would be better. $1 million, come on, sign me up. But think about money in the context of the greediest person you ever met. I'm willing to bet that that person is probably one of the most miserable people you've ever met. You know why? Because no matter how much money they hang on to and how much they try to gain it for themselves, it never fills the hole in their heart, and they want more. Look at what James says in James chapter 1, verse 14 and 15. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and here it is. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. See, church, sin ultimately leads us to death. And if you study the scriptures, you see that played out time and time again. You think about Solomon, considered one of the most wise, if not the most wise person in all of history. But guess what? Solomon had a weakness. He loved him some girls. He loved women. His dad had the same problem. So it was like father, like son. You see, King David had to watch his kingdom unravel before him because he decided to sleep with a woman who wasn't his wife. Why did he do it? Well, because he looked out and saw her and she was pretty and he said, I want to take this. And so what we see is Solomon was very similar. Look what 1 Kings 11 tells us. 1 Kings 11, starting verse 1. It says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. I don't care how wise you think you are. I don't care how wise you actually are. When you go against God's design for marriage, which is between one man and one woman, if you go against that setup, things will always go wrong. So let's see how this plays out in Solomon's life. We'll pick up now in verse 4. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord, his God, as his father David had been. Now jump down to verse 9. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. Let's go back to that verse in James 1:27 that talks about what true religion is. Let's look at it again. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God, the Father, means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. So we already talked about when you see something that he's doing, go do it as a Christ follower. But that last part, focus in on it. It says true and genuine religion is not only caring for orphans and widows, but pure and genuine religion is also not just not resisting it, no, refusing to let the world corrupt you. But that takes a choice. As we begin to wrap up today, I want you to notice something. I need you to understand that just because you choose obedience over pleasure doesn't mean you instantly get a God high five and a gold star. You're not going to instantly get a reward. Like, you don't say, well, I guess I'll tithe today, and then go home and someone dropped off the winning lotto ticket in your mailbox and now you're a millionaire. It doesn't work that way. You see, what we have to understand is it's about our perspective. Let me show you how this plays out. Recently, my daughter developed a cough. It got to the point that it was severe enough that at night especially, she would get into coughing fits that would keep her awake. It actually brought her to the verge of getting sick from coughing too much. And that's no bueno. That's no bueno. We can't let that happen. So we're like, hey, Alex, you got to have some medicine. So we offered her some cough syrup. Now, y'all, don't let the wrappers fool you. Cough syrup tastes gross. If you like cough syrup, you're one of those trauma people we talked about, right? Cough syrup is awful, and she knows this. She's old enough to have had it enough times in her life that she's like, ooh, gross. And so she's like, nah, I'm good. And she pushed back, and she's like, nah, I'm good. I'm good. I'll just deal with the inconvenience of coughing and not deal with the consequence of tasting that cough syrup. But you see, what it was for her is the promised relief of a eased chest and a good night's sleep where she's not coughing herself awake all night long. That promised relief was not the worth of the pain of taking the medicine now. She'd rather have the pleasure of keeping her taste buds from melting off. She'd rather have that than get the benefits. But when we finally convinced her, no, I'm sorry, young miss, but you don't get a say in this. Take your cough syrup. When she did, she was finally able to actually find peace and get some sleep. And often in our lives, obedience feels like that. Like, man, that pleasure looks good. And the pain that comes with the pleasure, I know you can tell me all day long what that's going to cause me, but you know what? I think it's going to be worth it in the long run. I'll deal with it for the pleasure now. And so we take the pleasure now with the promised pain later, because to us, the promised relief of peace that comes in our future, we don't feel like it's a guarantee. It is, but we don't feel like it. And so we'd rather have the here and now than be obedient and trust God in our future. I know a woman, when I first met her, she was in her 30s. She watched these young women she worked with get married at a young age, and yet she had not found somebody, and so she stayed single. She kept to be obedient when all around her the world was choosing temporary pleasure, but she stayed the course. But eventually, in her 30s, God brought her a husband. But she did things right. Took her a while to get there. A lot of lonely days, lonely nights, watching friends get married. Kept on trucking, but in the end had no regrets. You see, she was willing to be patient in God's timing. Now, something we'll look at soon. We skipped a few verses, if you remember, a few weeks ago. That was on purpose. We will come back to them. But something we see here today in Moses' story is in line with what we'll be talking about in coming weeks when we go back to those verses we skipped. But let's look at Moses' portion. Verse 26 of Hebrews 11. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. How did Moses make this faith decision to be obedient instead of living a life of sin? Well, he looked ahead. He looked ahead to his great reward. He had a future mindset. Y'all, let me tell you something. This world is not our home. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean we need to exit out the first available means. God put us here for a purpose, and we have a purpose to be here. And yes, it doesn't mean our life's going to be miserable. There are many great things about this life. For myself, the things I enjoy about this life, my wife, my daughter, food, we talked about it, my house, my cats, I'm a cat person. I love my car. I like playing video games. I like to fish. I like to hunt. There are a lot of good things to enjoy about this life, but the reality is, all those things are temporary. And God's not out there wanting us to just suffer in misery like some monk who can't even taste good food. That was the wrong idea people had. There were plenty of things he gave us in this life to enjoy, but the reality is what he wants us to lock in on is the best is yet to come. Think with me for just a moment of the best experience you've ever had. It could be anything. The most wonderful experience that comes to your mind. But the reality is, when we get to eternity, what comes next for us makes even that look pitiful because it's temporary. But we have a hard time thinking that way because all we know is this life. But when we look ahead like Moses did, when we look to the future for our reward, when we have a future-forward, eternity-centered mindset, then we start to make decisions similar to what Moses did. and what the others we have seen so far in Hebrews 11, how they made their decisions. In fact, our passage today tells us that Moses even walked away with Pharaoh's wrath at his back. How was he able to do even that? Look at verse 27 of Hebrews 11. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because, here it is, he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. He kept his eyes on God. You see, faith, we've talked about it. Faith is the tool that connects the visible with the invisible, the known with the unknown. That's how we do it, through faith. And that's what Moses did. So today I ask you, what is it in your life that you need to choose obedience in? What is it you're struggling with that seems better if you just stay in sin instead of following God? What is that for you? Because remember what we just saw, sin leads to death. It's an absolute thing. But when we keep our eyes on the one who is invisible, God, when we seek after the author of our faith, which we'll get to in Hebrews 12, which is Christ, then we'll find that like Moses, we'll be able to stay the course. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much for your word. These events in biblical history that we are going back over, what we see through the writings of Hebrews is that through the Holy Spirit's guidance, the writer of Hebrew brings to our attention truths from history, vital truths, things that we should pay attention to. Because in reality, what we've seen in our study, in this mini-series within a series, this study of Hebrews 11, as we were working our way through the book of Hebrews, is that faith is something crucial in our lives. It wasn't worth just a single verse and move on. It took an entire chapter that we are slowly working through as we see it displayed over and over again. And so God, today we look at how faith plays out in our life with sin. I'll be the first to admit, God, that I fall a lot because sin is pleasurable. But we got to get past that mindset. We need to be like Moses in this and realize that obedience is better than pleasure. That we should seek you with what we do because it's in those moments that we're looking ahead to our future reward. When your son was on this earth, Jesus said, where your heart is, that's where your treasure will be. So he said, instead of storing up stuff here, which will fade away eventually, look to put your treasures in heaven. And so God, we need to start doing that today. And so I ask for each and every one of us, bring to our minds, where is it that we're playing with sin? We're letting it fester. We'll deal with some of the big stuff, but this one we'll just leave in the corner. We'll keep it in the dark. That's just between us and the sin, and that brings us some fun, and so we keep it there. But God, we know that when it grows, it turns to death. Sin is an apex predator, what a lot of people teach, yet we play with it like it's a puppy. So God, let us get serious in our life. Let us look at these areas. Let your Spirit speak to us individually so we know clearly where you're leading us. And give us the ability to choose obedience. Let us in faith walk forward with the hope of a promised reward instead of the temptation of an immediate gratification. Because in doing so, God, we reap the benefits. We give you so much praise and glory for spelling it out for us so we don't have to figure it out on our own. You made it clear. And God, we thank you for that. We thank you for your son and his sacrifice, because without that, all this would be for nothing. And so today we end with this. It's in your son's precious and holy name that we pray. Amen.